Daniel was just a poor boy selling oranges on the busy streets of Lagos when he saw smoke rising from a rich man's car. Without thinking of himself, he shouted and pulled the man away just moments before the vehicle burst into flames. Welcome to Afro Tales TV, your home for rich, exciting, and inspiring stories from around the world. Today's story will touch your heart and keep you hooked till the very end. If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our amazing stories. The hot Lagos sun beat down on the crowded expressway, making the metal roofs of nearby shops glisten like they were on fire. The air was thick with noise, honking Danfo buses, conductors shouting for passengers, and the smell of roasted corn mixing with exhaust fumes. Amid the chaos, a young boy weaved carefully between the long line of cars stuck in traffic, balancing a large tray of oranges on his head. His name was Daniel. He was only 13, but his small shoulders already carried the weight of responsibility far heavier than his years. His shirt was faded and too big for him, hanging off his thin frame, and his shorts were patched at the knees. Yet his eyes were sharp, scanning the endless stream of car windows for customers. "Orange! Sweet orange! Buy your orange!" Daniel's voice rang out as he hurried toward a tinted SUV where a woman waved him closer. He gently lowered the tray from his head, wiped his sweaty forehead with the back of his hand, and quickly began to peel the oranges with a small, rusty knife. His hands were fast, practiced from years of hawking on the road. The woman bought 4 oranges, paid him quickly, and rolled her window back up, sinking again into the cool comfort of her air-conditioned car. Daniel pocketed the money carefully and smiled to himself. Every naira mattered. Every sale meant he was one step closer to buying bread on his way home or contributing to his mother's small market table. Daniel's story was not unique in Lagos. Like many children, he had been hawking since he could remember. His father, once a mechanic, had fallen sick years ago and never fully recovered. His mother, Evelyn, sold vegetables in a small wooden stall near their house in Mushin, but it was barely enough to keep the family afloat. Daniel had 2 younger siblings, Blessing and Chinedu, both still in primary school. Many mornings he had watched them leave for class with longing in his heart. He too had once gone to school, his teachers calling him bright and full of promise. But after his father's sickness, there had been no money for fees. Now, the road was his classroom. The traffic jam was his blackboard, and the lessons he learned came not from books, but from survival. As he darted between cars, balancing his tray, he thought of his dreams. He wanted to be more than this. He wanted to wear a neat uniform again, sit at a desk, and answer questions with his hand raised high. He wanted to make his mother proud, to lift his family from the endless cycle of struggle. Sometimes, when the day was too hot and the sales too few, his dreams felt far away. But other times, like today, when he had already sold half his tray, he allowed himself to hope. "Daniel!" another hawker called, a boy his age selling pure water. "How market?" Daniel grinned, shifting the tray on his head. "E better today. I don't sell plenty." The other boy laughed. "Nah so, God day." And then he hurried off toward a bus filled with thirsty passengers shouting for water. Daniel continued moving through the traffic, his bare feet slapping against the hot tar. He didn't mind the heat anymore. It was just part of life. He dodged a Kike Marua tricycle that swerved suddenly and almost knocked him over. The driver yelled an insult at him, but Daniel didn't answer. He just clutched his tray tightly and pressed on. At home, his mother would be waiting with tired eyes, but a smile that always warmed his heart. She never complained about his hawking. She only worried about his safety. Lagos roads were dangerous. Accidents, policemen chasing hawkers, and sometimes wicked adults who cheated children out of their money. But Daniel always promised her, "Mama, I'll be careful. I'll come back safe." And so he hawked with determination, Under the sun, under the noise, under the heavy weight of life, he was just a boy, but already a fighter. What Daniel didn't know was that life was about to change for him in a way he could never have imagined. A chance meeting on this very road amid the heat and chaos would soon alter the course of his story forever. While Daniel hustled under the blazing sun, another life was unfolding many kilometers away in Lekki, behind high white walls and iron gates. Richard Lawson sat at a polished dining table, scrolling through his iPad as he ate his breakfast. The air conditioner hummed gently in the background, cutting away the heat that most Lagosians were battling outside. Richard's house was a mansion, the kind that people slowed their cars to admire. It had a wide compound with palm trees neatly lined at the edges, a small fountain that gushed clear water, and cars parked like trophies. 2 SUVs, a sleek Mercedes, and a Toyota Prado for his wife. The walls inside gleamed with imported paint, the tiles shone, and the chandelier above the dining table sparkled like captured sunlight. Across the table, his wife Margaret sipped tea slowly, her makeup light but perfect, as usual. She was elegant, the kind of woman who turned heads at events. She had built her own boutique in Victoria Island, not because she needed the money, Richard's wealth was more than enough, but because she wanted to create something of her own. Their daughter Grace, 15 years old, was busy scribbling in her notebook, headphones tucked in her ears. She had inherited her mother's looks, slim, tall, and graceful, with a sharp intelligence in her eyes. Their younger son, David, 10, sat with his legs swinging under the chair, munching bread with chocolate spread and humming a tune. "Grace," Richard said, lowering his iPad, "don't forget your assignment. I don't want your teacher calling me again about late submission." Grace rolled her eyes. "I already finished it yesterday, Dad." Margaret smiled. "She's more organized than you think, Richard. She takes after me." Richard chuckled softly. His family was his pride, even though his busy schedule often kept him away. He wanted them to have the life he never had growing up, the best schools, the best home, the best opportunities. After breakfast, Richard stood up and adjusted his suit. "I have a meeting in Ikeja today. Musa is sick, so I'll drive myself." "Drive carefully," Margaret reminded him, standing to adjust his tie like she always did. "And don't overwork yourself. You've been pushing too hard." Richard kissed her on the forehead. "You know me. Work doesn't kill. It strengthens." She shook her head, but smiled. That was Richard, always chasing goals, always moving forward. Minutes later, Richard stepped into his black SUV. The car purred to life, smooth and powerful, one of his favorite possessions. The gate swung open, and he drove out into the Lagos streets, leaving behind the serene estate. The difference was immediate. Outside, Lagos roared. Danfo buses zigzagged dangerously, their conductors hanging halfway out of the doors, shouting "Ojuelegba, Yaba, Ikeja straight." Street hawkers tapped on car windows, waving bottled water, gala, ground nuts, and recharge cards. Pedestrians hurried along sidewalks, dodging Okadas, motorcycles, that whizzed past like arrows. Richard drove calmly, insulated by tinted windows and air conditioning. The chaos of Lagos barely touched him. He listened to the business news on the radio, his mind already preparing for the meeting ahead. But the city had its way of forcing itself into people's lives. Traffic thickened as he approached the third mainland bridge. Cars crawled, horns blared, and the sun seemed hotter. He sighed and drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. He was not used to waiting. Musa usually handled the stress of driving while Richard worked on his phone. Today he had no choice but to sit through the jam. As he glanced around impatiently, he noticed hawkers weaving between cars. Boys no older than his son carried heavy trays of goods on their heads, their faces dripping with sweat. One boy waved a bottle of water at him, but Richard shook his head and rolled his window higher. For a brief moment, he remembered his own childhood in Surulere, barefoot, carrying bread on his head, running after cars with hope in his eyes. His chest tightened at the memory, but he quickly shook it off. Those days were long gone. Now he was a man of means. He had earned his comfort. Still, he could not ignore the fact that the city outside his glass was another world, one of hunger, of hustle, of survival. And fate was about to remind him that life had a way of connecting the two worlds in unexpected ways. Because while he sat in traffic, sipping chilled water from his car fridge, a thin trail of smoke had begun to curl from the edge of his bonnet. He didn't notice it at first. The radio was on, the AC was cool, and his thoughts were elsewhere. But someone else noticed. A boy, small, barefoot, balancing a tray of oranges. His sharp eyes caught the smoke and his heart skipped. He knew what it meant. He dropped his tray with a thud and began to run. The afternoon heat pressed hard on the traffic-clogged expressway. Drivers leaned on their horns impatiently. Hawkers shouted prices and conductors yelled destinations with tired voices. Daniel balanced his tray of oranges on his head, weaving carefully through the maze of vehicles. He was used to the rhythm of the road, the screech of brakes, the insults of drivers, the quick exchanges of cash through half-rolled windows. But then his eyes caught something unusual. At first, he thought it was just dust rising from the road. But no. It was different. A thin gray ribbon of smoke curled from the front of a black SUV stuck several cars ahead. The car looked sleek and expensive, far beyond anything Daniel's family could ever dream of owning. Yet to him, the smoke was more than just a detail. It was danger. He froze for a moment, watching as the smoke thickened. Nobody else seemed to notice. The driver of the SUV sat calmly inside, probably enjoying cold air from the AC, unaware of the trouble brewing under the bonnet. Daniel's heart pounded. He had seen things like this before. A bus once caught fire near his street, and by the time people shouted and poured water, it had exploded, leaving behind nothing but black ash. His instincts screamed at him, "Do something now." Without thinking twice, Daniel dropped his tray by the roadside. Oranges rolled out, bouncing on the hot tar, but he didn't care. People shouted after him as he darted between cars, waving his hands frantically. "Oga! Oga! Fire day your motor!" Daniel's voice cracked with urgency. "Stop! Smoke day come out!" Inside the SUV, Richard tapped his steering wheel absent-mindedly. The radio played soft jazz now, and the AC was blowing strong. He barely heard the faint knock on his window. When he turned, he saw a thin boy in a torn shirt, waving and shouting, his hands pointing desperately to the front of the car. Richard frowned. He rolled down the window just slightly. "What is it? What do you want?" "Smoke day your motor, sir," Daniel shouted, sweat dripping down his face. "If it catch fire, come out quick." Richard blinked, confused. He glanced at his bonnet, then back at the boy. "Smoke," he muttered. He switched off the AC and opened the door, stepping out reluctantly. At that exact moment, a strong whiff of burning reached his nose. Then he saw it. The smoke was no longer thin. It was growing, curling angrily from under the bonnet. His stomach dropped. Other hawkers and drivers began to notice now. Shouts rose. "Fire! Fire day!" A Kiki driver reversed hurriedly, nearly hitting another car. A woman grabbed her baby and ran off the road. The traffic that had been at a standstill turned into chaos as drivers tried to maneuver away from the SUV. "Move! Move that car!" someone yelled. Richard's hands shook as he fumbled with his keys, unsure of what to do. His mind blanked. He had driven cars for decades but never faced a fire. The smoke thickened, and a loud hiss came from the bonnet. Daniel grabbed his arm. "Oga, leave am! Come out!" His small voice was filled with urgency, but his grip was firm. Richard stumbled back, coughing as smoke stung his eyes. The crowd grew louder. Someone shouted, "Go explode, oh!" People scattered, the fear of fire spreading faster than the smoke itself. Daniel pulled Richard away from the SUV, urging him to run further into the safety of the pedestrian path. The rich man's heart hammered in his chest. He had never felt so powerless, so small as he did at that moment, guided by a barefoot boy half his size. Then it happened. With a loud boom, flames burst from under the bonnet. The SUV coughed black smoke into the air like a dying beast. The crowd gasped and screamed, running further back. Horns blared as other cars reversed, creating an even bigger jam. Richard watched in horror as his beloved car burned. His hands trembled, his mouth dry. If he had stayed inside just a little longer. He shivered. The thought was too heavy. Daniel, panting, stood by his side, still holding his arm like a guard. His face was smeared with sweat and dust, his chest rising and falling quickly. But his eyes were steady. "Sir, I see him quick. I thank God you know still day inside." Richard turned to look at him fully for the first time. The boy couldn't have been more than 13 or 14. His shirt faded, his shorts torn at the edges. His bare feet were covered in dust, and his small hands were calloused from work. Yet this boy, this street hawker, had just saved his life. For a moment, Richard couldn't find words. His heart was still racing, but another feeling pushed through the fear: gratitude. Deep, overwhelming gratitude. The police eventually arrived, along with a fire service truck. They sprayed water and foam, battling the flames until the SUV was reduced to a smoking, blackened shell. Richard stood quietly, numb, as reporters and passers-by gathered to snap photos and videos on their phones. Lagos had a way of turning every incident into a spectacle. But Richard didn't care about the car anymore. He kept looking at Daniel. "Boy," Richard finally said, his voice hoarse. "What's your name?" Daniel hesitated, wiping sweat from his forehead. "My name Nathaniel, sir." You saved me," Richard said slowly, almost to himself. "If not for you..." His voice trailed off. He shook his head, trying to imagine what could have happened. Daniel looked down shyly. "I just see the smoke, sir. I know one make a bad thing happen. I don't see fire before. No day good." Richard studied him, his chest tightening again. The boy's humility struck him. No pride, no demand, just simple honesty. As the fire service cleared the area, an officer approached Richard. "Sir, you're lucky you stepped out on time. Cars like this, when the engine overheats, it can explode fully. You should thank God." Richard nodded, his eyes shifting back to Daniel. "I already did," he murmured. The traffic eventually resumed, though slowly. Richard knew he couldn't leave the boy there. Something inside him, something stronger than logic, told him that this meeting wasn't ordinary. "Daniel," he said firmly, "where is your house? Who are your parents?" Daniel hesitated. He wasn't used to rich men asking such questions. Usually they brushed him aside like he was invisible. He swallowed hard. "I'd stay for Mushin with my mama and two small brother and sister. My papa, he know too well. We'd manage." Richard nodded slowly. The name Mushin brought back memories. He knew what it meant. A tough place, filled with struggle. The contrast between his own Lekki mansion and the boy's world was like night and day. He placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Take me to your home. I want to meet your family." Daniel's eyes widened. "Sir?" "I insist," Richard said, his voice steady. "You didn't just save my car. You saved me. I cannot go home today without knowing the boy who pulled me from death." For the first time since the fire began, Daniel smiled. It was small, shy, but it lit up his tired face. He nodded. "Okay, sir. I go show you." As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, the two unlikely companions, one barefoot hawker, one wealthy businessman, set out together toward Mushin. Cars still honked, hawkers still called, Lagos still roared, but something had shifted. Two lives, once worlds apart, were now forever linked by fire on the road.